So is your MacBook's battery in that normal range? Let's talk about it. All right, welcome back to the channel. So one of the top questions, the number one question I get all the time on my channel is, hey, I have this M1 MacBook Air and I'm getting 8 hours of battery life. Is that normal? So for this video, the key word here is normal. Remember that for later, because by the end of the video, I'm going to try to give you this normal range for either an M1, an M2, or an M3 MacBook. Are your battery, is it lasting a normal amount of time? And again, normal is the key here. And the crazy thing is this causes people so much stress for some reason, more than their own health even. But then you also have these other people that they get 18 hours. They're like, I got 18 hours. They kind of pump their chest and stuff. It's almost like they ran a marathon or something. And don't get me into people that run marathons either. But anyways, you get the idea. But the funny thing is this. The people that usually run, that usually can get the 18 hours, usually, I'm not saying all the time, but they're usually the most unproductive people that use the Macs anyway. They're usually sitting in their bedroom with the lights off at 12% brightness on their Mac, watching reruns of Breaking Bad all day long. And then they eke out that 18, but they're so happy about it. But that's not normal either. So what is? So all this got me thinking. I run obviously a channel here. I have a lot of different Macs and stuff around my room, so I get a lot of data. But even so, Apple claims, 16, 18, 20 hours. But really, Apple says in the fine print, like it's got to be at, 600 feet above sea level at 18 degrees C. You got to have your brightness at 18.5% brightness. And you got to be watching a chess match where they only move one move every 30 minutes across the screen. And then you're able to achieve it. So it's not really black and white. So having all these different MacBooks, I started thinking myself, can I put a number on this? You would think Apple would have that number, the normal number, but obviously, Apple, they don't. So I started kind of, I just wanted to get this data, but to me, it was even inconsistent myself. Some days I would get more, some days I would get less. It was like all over the place, and it got me thinking. So I guess, is there really a normal range? Well, I think there is, and we're going to kind of address it at the end of the video here, so stay tuned for that. I'm also going to be going through a whole bunch of different Reddit posts here, showing you what normal people are getting, so that's really good data for yourself as well. But we always have to ask the question, is normal somebody that does 4 hours of video editing, then watches 2 hours of movies, and then uses Word? Is that normal for a day? Or is normal someone that has 20 widgets open at 85% brightness, that basically is on Notion half the day, and then they do a couple of video calls? Is that normal? Is it normal to be living in a cave at 12% brightness on your Mac? Or is it normal to be living in a glass house at 85% brightness? These are all things that can change your Mac up to 75% difference in the battery time. So we got to kind of find that sweet spot. So at the end of the day, there really is not a normal, but I'm going to figure this out. First, let's read a whole bunch of different posts from Reddit here, and we're going to figure out what these supposedly normal people, and trust me, no one's normal, are getting. All right, the first guy here says, and this is the problem with everything. Take a look at this first guy. It says, it depends on what you're doing. I have a lightly used 2020 M1, browsing the internet, 25 or 30% brightness, 20 hours of battery. Imagine that, 20 hours. But he's saying loading up shortcut, throwing in drone footage, doing color correction and other edits, and rendering can kill the battery in 4. So 20 hours or 4. So what's normal there? This is the problem we run up against. Let's just keep moving here. I just picked up the 14-inch M1 MacBook Pro right here. He's saying he did about 2 hours of initial setup here, and he was down to 75%. So if you do the math on that, that's 2 hours, 25%. That's about 8 hours. But that's the initial setup, so we're going to give him, obviously there's more going on there. So he might get between 8 and 10 realistically here based on this guy's statistics, right? I think that's a kind of a fair range there. Let's just keep moving down the list. This guy says I get 14 hours on my MacBook Pro 16, but I've always had it on low power mode, and I don't do anything heavy on it. So he's got it on low power mode. He's stretching it out, and it's 14 hours on, the MacBook Pro 16. That's supposed to have one of the best batteries, I think, isn't it? So who knows, right? And then down here it says, for me, it is. I just recently bought a 14-inch MacBook Pro on Tuesday, charged it only once, and after it arrived. Since then, I've watched movies on it, done a bit of editing here and there, and spent a little bit too much time on YouTube. It's sitting at 47%. It really depends on how much you use it. He's saying, though, that he used to have a battery on his HP laptop, and he's just saying, I really couldn't ask for more in this. So he doesn't really care that much. He isn't really saying how much he's used it here, but you can see that he's just done a little stuff. So who knows? We can't put a range on that, but you can see that he's actually happy when compared to the HP laptop. All right, so we're going to go through about 10 more of these Reddit posts just to get some normal reactions. So I hope you like this. And then I'm going to tell you what, I'm going to wrap it up and give you my kind of final verdict and everything. This guy over here is talking about coming from the M1. He says the underperforming battery life is what's making me wait for the M2. Most reviews I hear are 5 to 8 hours. So he's just saying he can't remember the usage, but 5 to 8 hours. This guy's saying, same issue. I upgraded my MacBook Air M1 to a MacBook Pro 14, and the battery life is much worse compared to the Air. I could work an additional display for 6 to 9 hours without charging, and now it only holds a battery for about 6 hours. You can see the difference there. M1 to the MacBook Pro, he went from 6 to 9 hours to 6 hours. Pretty big difference, right? This guy's saying, I use the MacBook Pro 14 as my daily driver here. I use Google Docs, Zoom, iMovie, and Adobe, and all these other things like this. He's saying, I get bored and play a few games and stuff, and I watch YouTube. It lasts about 6 to 8 hours for me, and I go home and charge it, and I still have about 20 to 30% left. So 6 to 8 hours, 20 to 30%, he's getting about, 6 to 10, 6 to 12 hours, somewhere in there. Kind of gives us a good idea there, but let's keep going. This next guy, Dangerous Gas, who knows? Anyways, you can see the guy's name here. It says right down here, it says, and even I have a ton of tabs open and watching YouTube. As long as I keep the screen brightness around medium, somewhere in the middle, 2 to 3 notches, then I do indeed get about 12 to 15 hours of battery life. And when the M1 Pro 16 is really only supposed to be getting around 14. So you can see by this guy, he's getting actually a little bit more battery, and he's telling you he's just watching YouTube and doing some other things, but his screen brightness is really important. All right, this next guy over here says, real case use, 3 hours on Google Meet class for with an HDMI connection to an external 4K monitor. Takes my battery from 100 to 55%. So what is that? That's 3 hours, 6 hours, maybe that's about 7 hours for that guy. All right, this next guy gives us a whole bunch of information. Take a look at this. FYI, I have a max 2 to 4 tabs open in Safari. I quit all the apps I don't need. I track the activity with minor suspicious power consumptions. But he's showing his battery here. So 1050, that's the time, I believe. He has 71%. 1250, he has 53%. So if you look at that, that's 2 hours roughly, 20% roughly. He's getting about 10 hours of battery per day. If you obviously basically an hour for every 10%. Is that normal? All right, the next guy, this gives us a little bit more information. He says, I used 20% in 2 hours. He says, roughly extrapolating, you get 10 hours of watching YouTube videos. But he says, the last Windows laptop I owned barely got 2 to 4 hours. Now he's getting 10. All right, this next guy here says, hey, everyone, I'm new to Mac, and I'm a light user, so the laptop lasts for 48 hours on a single charge with about 7 to 8 hours of screen time. So he's talking 48 hours of, obviously just, before he has to charge it, but he's not using it. Only 7 to 8 hours of screen time. He says, I've seen YouTubers that say that they get 15 plus hours of screen time. Can someone help me out understanding why my battery is not getting that? This guy says it depends a lot on factors like what apps you're using, how bright your screen is, etc. This guy says, I'm using Brave for 70% of the time, WhatsApp, Notion. So they're all talking about this stuff, but you can kind of see a trend here. This next guy here says, that's really cool because I see you ran Xcode. My MacBook Pro 16, this is an M1. Life is so bad. For writing tasks, about 4 to 5 hours, and for coding, video, and photo editing, about 2 to 3 hours. I have no idea why. So this guy's got an M1 MacBook 16-inch Pro. He's getting between, 2 and 5 hours with doing really, really heavy tasks. This next guy gives us a little more information. He says, I get about 8 hours with my production stuff running and about 13 hours just doing light writing or browsing through. I haven't really timed it since upgrading to Ventura. My feeling is that using the battery life is still insane after a year, and I can get a full day of business work done in one charge. The laptop is plugged in about 80% of the time. So he talks about that, but gives us a little more information here. This guy says, to my very own surprise, I get around 26 hours, this meant battery, on light use. And he says, and about 17 on heavy workload. So this guy is full of beep. But we keep going. Here's some big users. They claim to get a lot. I have the exact computer, and I've been getting around 18 to 22 hours out of a full charge. I suggest you completely drain the battery and charge it from an empty in one full shot. He's kind of explaining how you do it to get that full charge. But 18 to 22 hours might be possible, and I know people can get it. But again, it has to be under a very, very, very probably non-productive specific thing you're doing. All right, the next guy here, this was deleted for some reason. The external monitor and higher than normal brightness were the culprit. Without it, I get around 12 to 13 hours of use in my workflow, so 12 to 13 hours for this guy. All right, this next guy down here, I'm just going to skip to it. He says, but now it's a week old and it still loses about 15% battery in an hour. So what does that come out to? 15%, like 7 hours, somewhere in that range roughly. All right, this next guy says MacBook Pro 14 M2 Base Pro, 4 to 5 hours battery life when editing. Is this normal to have a battery life like this? I use Premiere Pro in editing 8-bit 4K footage from an A7 III It doesn't really matter, but he says it's almost 2 months old. 4 to 5 hours at editing 8K. I think that's pretty normal. And finally, this guy says M1 battery life is absolutely overkill. I just finished a 7-hour rehearsal, which I was running main stage to trigger a variety of percussion sounds to an MIDI controller. Rarely a break, constantly playing, constantly triggering a sound. After 7 hours rehearsal, he had 60% battery life. He's saying down here older Macs could basically run out in 3. So he's super happy. He got 60% left, 7 hours. He can do a whole nother rehearsal. This guy, he just loves his M1. All right, so there's the dilemma. There's the big rub. Is there actually a normal number? And I think there's not, but I'm going to give you one anyway in a second. But if you can imagine, it all depends on what you're doing, and everyone's day, every single day is completely different. I mean, you could have things open that you don't even know are running in the background. You could have widgets. You could have an app that's 6 months old that's eating up all your stuff. You could have doing video editing one day and just reading other stuff the other day. So it's all over the board, and that's really what the problem is coming up with a normal number. And it scares new Mac users because they see an initial number and they're like, why am I not getting 18 or 20 hours? Because like I said, most of those people are not being too productive. All right, so what's the normal range? Drum roll, please. From all my research, from reading all hundreds of different posts, your normal range of an M1, M2, M3 MacBook battery, whether it's even the Air, I'm going to combine them all, 6 to 12 hours, all right? So if you're getting 6 hours, you're a power user, you're probably doing video editing, big photo editing, stuff like that. 6 hours, totally fine. If you're getting 12 hours, I sometimes get up to 12 hours, but I'm just writing stuff. I'm looking at YouTube videos. I'm doing more light work. And then when I do my video editing, I'm somewhere in the middle there, right? 6 to 12, maybe around 8 hours, somewhere in that range, because I'm not super heavy in my video editing. But I think the 6 to 12 hour range, if you fall anywhere within there, you're probably, it's hard to say, but probably in the normal range. So at the end of the day, my famous line here is, we're all different. Your backlight on your keyboard could be different than the next guy. Your screen brightness is obviously different. What you're doing when you game, even if you're in a game and you're moving around versus sitting behind a tree, it's all different, right? So we're going to get different stats. But one thing you can be sure of is if you're getting 8 hours on your Mac, you're probably only getting 4 hours on your Windows PC. If you're getting 12 hours on your Mac, you're probably only getting 5 or 6 on your Windows PC. So you should at least be proud of that you actually have a computer that's probably the most power efficient systems that are on the market. Now I know that there's coming out with some new ones from Copilot, from Microsoft, Copilot and those type of things that are going to be challenging the Mac, but maybe that'll make the Mac even better. But from what I've learned over all these years is there's no such thing as normal. I'm not normal, you're not normal, even though you think you are. So this is the kind of the moral of the whole video is you just can't stress out. But if you fall in that 6 to 12 hours, I think you're totally fine. And we'll wrap this up. Out of all my research, this is what I came up with. It's a super high scientific research I've done here, like NASA does for putting people on the moon. And I think it's fairly accurate. So we'll talk to everybody in the next one. Please subscribe if you can. Peace.